here. And we are live on air. So welcome to a tumultuous start here, Jeff, but we are here. We are here. So my setting is a little bit blurred. I'm actually, due to the wonderful nature of just technology overall, I actually had to literally move from a stable internet connection. Everything went down, and I am now on a Wi-Fi hotspot in my car. So I'm really, would this be design thinking, Jeff? Ways around or new innovative approaches to doing webinars on the fly, I would say, right?
Yeah, I think it's very innovative, actually. So well done.
So, so I'm here with Jeff Warren, the amazing Jeff Warren. We are, who has been very patient these last few minutes, at least. We've been planning this for a little bit, so we've been really looking at doing something around design thinking. This is part of the School Professional Development video series. We've done a number of these so far. One for human resources, one women in STEM. So we're on diversity, equity, inclusion. So we're really looking forward to talking to you, Jeff, around design thinking, around the why of design thinking, around how the philosophy, the ideology of design thinking. It's something that I have been peripherally involved and interested in throughout my educational career, that I'm pretty passionate about as far as a mindset and ideology. And I'm really looking forward to this session with you. We do have Q&A available. If anyone does want to put in Q&A questions in there, you're welcome to use a little Q&A button on the bottom and put a question in there. We will answer those questions at the end. If we haven't answered them during the session, we will answer those questions after the 20 or 30-minute session that we have with Jeff. So Jeff, welcome. You want to do a quick intro, and then we'll get into some really great questions and a discussion around design thinking.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me from your car. This is really, really different for me too. But yeah, thanks for having me. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I think is taking hold in industry. My own personal story is I spent most of my career in private industry, primarily at the Estee Lauder companies in New York. I kind of kid with people, I know more about makeup than most men should. I spent my career in IT, and the last part of my career was more on the management and business side of IT, working with Estee Lauder's brands, 34 of them. It's a wonderful company that is very innovative in nature, and that's where I really got exposed to design thinking and innovation by helping the brands come up with new and innovative products. I started my own consultancy about 5 years ago or so, and I focus on two different areas. One is on working with IT organizations to create business-focused strategies, and the other one is on design thinking and innovation, working with organizations, public, private, government institutions, on just being able to think differently and prepare themselves for the future. So I'm really honored to be here, and I look forward to the discussion with you, Al.
Great, thank you for that intro. So I know design thinking has been around for a little bit, and a lot of people hear it. Some think of it as sort of a buzzword. Oh, design thinking, that's a great thing to incorporate. But a lot of people, including quite honestly, even with my experience in education, a lot of people really don't understand what it truly is and have a really good understanding of not just what it is, how it's used, how it can be implemented, the practices around it, Jeff. So could you, I know we have a little graphic too that maybe we could walk through after you do a brief description or intro about this piece. But I know you obviously are an expert in this space. So could you sort of contextualize and explain what design thinking is and how it's used for the audience?
Yeah, sure. You know, a lot of times when people hear the term design thinking, they think it's about product design or graphic design or architecture, something with that sort of field. And the reality is design thinking is an approach for innovation that embraces empathy, inspires creativity, and encourages experimentation. It's all meant to address a situation that you have, a problem you're facing, or a market that may be developing, and develop meaningful solutions for the people that you're designing for. And meaningful is the operative word there. Everybody can design a solution. Everybody does design a solution. How many times do you work with or buy from a company and you see the products that they have out there and they come out with this new and innovative product, and you look at it and it's the same product they had before. It's a different package, a different marketing slogan, or they promise you that this is a much better and new and different experience, and it really isn't either, which actually has the opposite effect because it disappoints more than it delights. And what design thinking does is, by embracing empathy and creativity, allowing experimentation, and almost encouraging failure, because failure is actually a good thing. You learn from failing. And the more you fail, the more you're going to learn, the better off you're going to be going forward. It really focuses on developing things that are incredibly meaningful for the audience that you're intended for. Design thinking, I think one of the biggest things that differentiates it is it first focuses on getting in the heads and the hearts of the people you're designing for. So many companies have this arrogance that they know what their consumers want because they have market research and they know their jobs very well, which they do. But you have to truly understand the perspective of your audience to know what you have to deliver for them. And that's not just for a consumer company. That's for employees. That's for students in a university. That's for constituents in a county or state or federal government. It's about understanding what is in their heads and their hearts that's so important. And that's what design thinking, I think where it really differentiates from most everything else, is it starts there. Because you don't know what people want, and you can't ask them, by the way. It's the old Henry Ford quote. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. People don't know what they want. You're the one that's supposed to know what they want by understanding what is important to them emotionally, what's in their heads and their hearts and their perspective on things, and using that with the knowledge you have to put it together, come up with something really, really terrific. But the other thing that design thinking does is it activates something that we're all born with, and that's creativity. We are all born creative. And if you ever see a child that's given an iPhone or an Android or whatever your device choice is, and the parents or the family members are gushing over them, look how smart Johnny is, look how incredibly smart Mary is, they picked this up and knew how to use it. Well, of course they did, because we haven't taught them what not to do. We didn't tell them which buttons to push, what doesn't work, what you're supposed to do with a device. They're curious, they're explorers, they're just looking at things in a different light, and we're all born that way. And then we go through an education system, a left brain education system that just beats the creativity out of us. Here's what I'm going to teach you, study it, now I'm going to test you on it, give me the answer, I'll mark you, let's move on to the next thing. It's all about, I'm giving you a problem, you give me an answer, and move on. And creativity is frowned upon because you have to give that literal answer. We move into a corporate world where it's the same thing. I mean, you're given a project or a task or a report you have to deliver, you give it, you get graded. I mean, it's a paycheck, not necessarily a performance review, not a B or C. And then you move on to the next thing. And everything is driven by our left brains. And what design thinking does is it gives the left brain a rest. It's not suggesting it's not important, but it gives it a rest, and it lets you exercise your right brain muscle. And when you do that, it's amazing what the human spirit can do. And I've done this with people in all sorts of industries, technical workers, bankers, lawyers, people who are literally looking at things from a left brain perspective, and it's amazing what they ultimately come up with. So,
and Jeff, there's an actual plan, practice, steps to do this, which I know you're going to bring up in a second. A couple things have really resonated with me as you were talking, and I think this is one of the things, especially with design thinking, but even beyond just working through your life and work in general, is this idea that that failure is okay too, and that's a big hurdle for a lot of people. I love this saying, practice, instead of practice makes perfect, practice makes progress, and it has that same kind of connotation where it's okay. You may never be perfect, right? It may never be exactly what you want it to be. But I love that aspect of what you're talking about, and that's something that we get into a little bit more, because it's not an easy thing. We're talking about ideology. We're talking about mindset changing. We're talking about looking at things and doing things in a very different way. And it's different from ideation, which we'll talk about as well in a little bit. So I'd love for you to, if you could bring up that graphic and just briefly walk us through the steps, because this is not, even though people find sort of ambiguity in trying to, or there's a lack of understanding or refinement of what design thinking is, listening to your response and going through this graphic, I think will be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So let me bring that up. Except that it says the host disabled participant screen sharing. So you're not letting me.
So let me see. This is another little.
But while you're doing that, just to pick up on your note on failure, one of the most famous design companies in the world is IDEO, and I'm kind of a disciple of their thinking. And on their walls, you'll see all over the place a saying that says, "Fail fast to succeed sooner." They almost encourage failure because you learn from that. If you think anybody that invented anything, from the light bulb to the iPod or anything like that, came out with it the first shot, you're out of your mind. I mean, they go through a lot of iterations and failures and changes to it till you get to something great. So failure is actually really good, which is kind of ironic that I'm saying this on a university podcast where failure is not good in a university, but it is something that is certainly recommended when you're being innovative and creative, because you learn from what works and what doesn't.
And for those of you who jumped on a little later, there was somewhat of what could be construed as a failure in getting this going, right? Behind the scenes, my lovely wife drove me up to the local high school where she works, and we're outside. We thought quickly of a solution. She did. I'm outside on Wi-Fi, just outside the high school, which is near my house, to get internet connection. So I could have crumbled, right, and said this is a failure, this is not going to work, but we didn't, right? We're doing this here. So we're living it right now in a way, right? So
you learn, you adapt, right? And
exactly, learn, adapt. So here is your slide, so you can go through this, and then we'll get an ideation is in there, and that's something we want to talk about as well.
Yeah, sure. So let me take you through this. This is design thinking, what you're looking at here. There's no manual. You don't have to get your black belt. You don't need an army of consultants to do this. If anybody tells you you need to read a book on design thinking to learn about it, don't ever talk to them about design thinking again. Design thinking is incredibly experiential, and the way it's applied can be different amongst different companies and different organizations. And that's the beauty of it. It's not so literal that you have to follow steps so specific, but it's giving you a framework for innovation. And so I'm going to teach you now design thinking in about 3 or 4 minutes, and you'll know enough to know what the process is about. So step one, and I talked about this before, this is the most important part of design thinking by far, in my view. It's empathy. It's about starting the process by understanding what's in the heads and the hearts of the people you are designing for. You do this by observing them. You do this by immersing yourself in the experience they're going through. Most importantly, you do this by talking to them and getting them to tell you stories and give you insights. Because once you can understand where your audience is coming from, you can do magical things with that. And this is one step that almost every company avoids. They just don't want to do this because they think that they know what their employees want, what their consumers want, what their constituents want. And it's so critical, because in every workshop that I run, when people come back from their empathy work, they come back saying, I had no idea. I didn't understand this. I couldn't believe what I heard. So empathy is step one. What's in the heads and the hearts of the people you're designing for? Once you have that, we move to step two, which is define. Now that I know that, what's the real problem that I have to solve? I did one of the first workshops I ever did was out at the D School at Stanford. I was with 40 other IT executives where we had to design the office of the future, and we knew what the office of the future was. We were IT executives. Right? No cubicles, walls you can write on, keg parties on Thursdays, an innovation room where you can go blow off steam. And then they made us do this through design thinking. We had to go out and talk to students. And what we found out when we talked to the students was nobody cared about the office. Everyone cared about the experience they were having. Are they giving back to the community? What is it going to be like? Who am I going to work with? Is there going to be camaraderie? We would have been solving the wrong problem. We would have invested millions of dollars in new office space and in fact not solved anything. So once you do your empathy work, you use that to figure out, now that I know that, what's the real problem that I have to solve here? What's the opportunity that I have? When you're done with that, you move into ideation. And ideation is pretty simple. It's brainstorming. It's where you do this rapid fire ideation where people throw out as many wild and crazy ideas as you can, and you start synthesizing them and grouping them to understand what the real possibilities are for innovation. What's really interesting is most companies start here. They start at the ideation phase. And when they start here, you can see that they're missing so many of the other insights that they've gathered here, and maybe potentially solving the wrong problem. So it's not bad to start here, but you don't do yourself any service by starting with this. Once you've ideated and brainstormed a number of solutions to solve this problem that you came up with in Define, you move to the next step, another step that really a lot of companies and organizations don't do, and that is you build a prototype for that solution. And the prototype is not a working model. It's not that you have to build a computer system or you have to build a full-blown counter for a store or a process for employees. It's a very crude representation, a tangible representation of your idea. Because if I say, hey, I have this idea and I tell you what it is, what I'm saying and what you're thinking could be two different things. But if I show you something that you interact with, we're talking about the same thing. And then when you have this prototype built, and again, very crude, very fast, I'm talking construction paper and glue and poster board, etc. You then take it out and test it with your audience. You bring your solution out and say, we're thinking of doing this, what do you think? And they come back with amazing feedback. I love that. I hate that, I would never use it, which is kind of really good feedback to hear. There's the failure part. You failed, but you can go back and iterate your prototype to make it better, or try a different idea. Or maybe you didn't have the right problem. You can go back as far as you want. Or most importantly, what happens in the test phase is people will give you feedback. I like what you're doing, but why are you doing it this way? Could you add this? I have an idea, why don't you do this? And when they give you all of this feedback in test, you go back to prototype, you iterate your prototype, you bring it back out to people and test it. And you keep doing this until you have something that your audience says is something that you really, really would like. Now, when you're done with this process, you have understood what your audience thinks, feels, and sees. You figured out the right problem to solve. You came up with great ideas for it, and you built prototypes and tested a working model. So when you bring it back to management, they're going to see something that's not just an idea someone had, but a working model that really resonates with people. So you now all are design thinkers. You know, design thinking, there's no more to this. I mean, there are other steps that people put in the middle or in before or after to connect it to other things, but that's the basic guts of design thinking. But suggesting that you're design thinkers by reading this and listening to me is like suggesting I could teach you how to play golf by saying, here's a golf club, here's a golf ball, hit the ball into the hole 380 yards away, now you know how to play golf. Well, do, but you really have to experience it to understand what it's about. And it's the same thing with design thinking. Design thinking is incredibly experiential. You learn by doing.
And I think you're describing a model for not just doing things in the corporate space, but this is done, just so the audience knows, in the educational world for kindergarten on up, as far as helping kids learn. This experiential piece is very popular from K-12 all the way on up through higher ed. So this is something that exists in many places in many forms. I want to go back to the at the top of this, and you could stop sharing if you want, Jeff. This says the design thinking process, and I know we've spoken offline about this. I'm going to go back to that first part, which is the empathy piece. And empathy, in a lot of ways, should be a driver for almost everything we do, right? Having an understanding of where people are at, what their needs are, what the problem is, because they may not even realize what the problem is, right? That they need to solve. I mean, would you classify design thinking as a process or as a mindset, or both? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I hate the word process. I hate the word process because it tries to move it into that left brain camp of step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're done. And like I told you, this is a very movable process in the sense that you may go back at any particular time and revisit things. You may go through the entire process and realize, you know what, we need to do our empathy work again, or we need to do more of it because we didn't get all of the insights. We're not clicking on any of these ideas. So I just hate the word process. It just sounds, too corporate and standard. I call it an approach. It is a mindset. it could be a framework, it could be anything that you want it to be, but it is really something that you experience. It is not something. That's why I say I just taught it to you, but you've got to kind of know it. And you talk about empathy. I did work with an IT organization one time, and we just did the empathy work on day one. And day two, the guy who ran their service desk came to me and said, "We solved a problem just now that we've had for years, only because we started to look at it from the user's point of view." And that's it's. I think it's the most valuable part of design thinking for sure in the process, but just in life. You know, if you empathize more with people, whether you're working with them, this can be done in your own homes as well. It just can really be an amazing thing. So I again, you can call it whatever you want. People will put it in their own vernacular and use it the way they want. But I look at it more as an approach to innovation that lets you really get to from empathy all the way through a working solution.
So, I mean, you spoke a little bit to this, Jeff. Like, why not just leave things as they are? Why design thinking? Things are okay the way we have it, kind of mindset, and a lot of people have that in the corporate space, in the space of education, higher ed, K-12 ed, corporate education. All that is just this inherent belief, inherent mindset. So, why design thinking? Why do we need to think differently than we're thinking now? And I know you did some of that, but if you could expand on that a little bit here.
Yeah, it's a very common thought, right? There's a very common thought that everything's fine. I don't need to think differently. We're working just well. Our stock price is great. Our shareholders love us. Everybody's being paid. The products are being formed. We're shipping out goods, or our graduation rates are just fine. The standard test scores are just fine. We're good. We don't have to do anything different. The best way to describe this is to talk about an article that was in Fortune magazine back in the 90s. And it talked about 3 companies that lead its field and lead their fields and just will never vanish from the face of the earth because they are so dominant and things just go so well for them. Those 3 companies were Sears, IBM, and General Motors, right? Look at where those 3 companies are right now. Sears, I don't even know if it exists anymore. I know that they've closed almost every one of their stores. General Motors is a viable company, but they're not the player anymore. I mean, when a company like Tesla comes along, who happen to be innovative, by the way, and think differently, they knock them right off the top mark. And then you look at IBM, who again is doing well, but they're not the business they were in the 90s. They really pivoted. And by the way, IBM uses design thinking quite a bit as well. So when you look at companies, when you look at government organizations, when you look at educational institutions that say everything's fine, we don't have to change, you have to question their grasp on the world. I mean, if you think about what is changing every single day, technology is changing every day, customer habits are changing, and whether those customers are employees, students, or consumers, it doesn't matter. Socioeconomic conditions are changing. Look at COVID, what that did to our world.
Mm-hmm.
How you can think that what you're doing today is going to work tomorrow is a little bit insane. And there's another great quote, and it's kind of attributed to Henry Ford. I've also seen some of these motivational speakers take credit for it too. But it says, if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you always got.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that with companies all of the time that think, I don't know that we need to do this. We seem to be fine. You will never survive because you may be fine this year and you may be fine next year, but somebody is going to eat your lunch. And if you think of the barriers of entry now for competition, they're minimal. You can get small startups from their house, from their homes, that have access to the same markets and same technology that anybody did before. You know, when a company like Estee Lauder was so dominant, and it still is dominant, but when it was so dominant, like other companies that size in the 80s and 90s, maybe even early 2000s, they really owned the marketplace. But you look at all of the startups in the industries, in the beauty industry, there's influencers on YouTube and Instagram that are affecting businesses more than anybody else. When you look at the barriers to entry, they're not there anymore. And so you have to pivot, you have to be nimble, and you have to flex. So if you don't employ something like design thinking, you're writing your own ticket for failure. And that's ultimately what happens with a lot of these companies. Look how many shift from the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100 every year, and look at the companies that are at the top and think about what they do differently than the companies that are leaving. It's all about innovation. It's about reinventing yourself. It's about pivoting.
And I know spoke offline for those of you in the education space. most people know Microsoft and Google. We talked last week, I think, Jeff, about Google. If you ever thought that Google would take over education and be the premier suite for education a few years back, people would have thought you were crazy. But
Yep.
they had a model that they gave everything education away for free. And really, Microsoft at the time was not in that design thinking mindset. They just assumed and
Yep.
did the things the way they did. And Microsoft has survived and adapted and changed their ways of thinking since then and made more inroads back into education. But those are the kind of things
Sure.
that we could really go to and think about as far as a company that's established that doesn't want to think in a different way can easily be sort of usurped by a different company, whether it's a big company like Google, who wasn't as big at the time, or a small company, like you said, with the advent of technology and access to really anything you want at any given time. That's a game changer because you'll be left behind, like you said, right?
Oh, absolutely. And you think about education just for a quick second. I heard something the other day that said that children who are entering school right now will retire in the year 2080. 20,
Wow.
and we're teaching them things that are we learned when we were in school. How is that preparing them? Well, you can't suggest that, well, we don't need to teach them English, math, and social studies and stuff. You have to, of course you do. But we need to supplement that with teaching them how to think instead of only teaching them what to think. And there's such an opportunity. I'm actually speaking at the Aero conference this Friday on design thinking in education. And there's such an opportunity to help kids prepare themselves for a world that's going to change 100 times between now and the time that they retire. So yeah, I mean, the applications to education are just astronomical.
And we'll talk a little bit about this moving forward with the School of Professional Development and the Center for Corporate Education. We'll talk about some opportunities there in a little bit. But in particular, and you briefly touched on this, how COVID has, what's happened in the past year has almost forced us into this design thinking mindset where we had to think outside the box in every space, and we had to adapt, we had to try, we had to fail, right? But specifically because it's going to happen with leadership, right? It's going to happen with how we're looking at things as leaders in organizations. So how does it connect to like leadership development, and then obviously trickle down into corporate and educational spaces?
Well, I think what's really interesting is when the pandemic hit, all of these stoic and very static leaders were panicking because, what are we going to do? How are we going to work? How are things going to transpire as we no longer can have people come in the office? They didn't know what to do. And yet other organizations where they had leaders who were able to adapt, who were able to pivot, who were able to understand that there's a new world that we have to address, were very successful. And if it wasn't the chief executive, it was somebody below them, or it was, in many cases, the CIOs of many companies, because technology was so key in the pandemic. But, when you think of a strong leader, there's a lot of different images and capabilities and competencies that can come up. But once again, talking about the way the world is changing, a leader who can look at things and understand not only that the world is changing and we have to adapt and I need a way to do that, but it's also a leader who understands that ideas just don't come from the 6-person creative group that you have. Ideas come from anywhere. And one of the other things that design thinking does is it invites diversity of thought. So when we do workshops, when we put teams together, we usually have 4, 5, 6 teams. We put teams together of people who don't work together, who aren't at the same level, who don't have the same background, because when you come at things from a different angle, you're able to come up with new and better ideas. And leaders, strong leaders, know that. So they seek advice, they seek guidance, they seek ideas from everywhere in their company, and the amazing things usually come from the places that you least expect it. And the other thing that design thinking does when you build this type of right brain atmosphere is you'll find that your employees, their morale is higher, their interest is higher, their passion is greater, because they are now being invited to participate in driving the growth and direction of their organization. And again, this applies to a corporation, a government institution, an educational institution, a nonprofit. It's all of the same. So good leaders will understand that. And when you talk about leadership development, we do, as one of my clients uses design thinking as a main driver in their leadership program. It's because they want people to not only empathize with their customers, which is a revolutionary concept, of course, right? Thinking about what your customers really want rather than what you want to give them. But not only that, it's about taking action on that and being able to do it and empowering them to think differently and allowing them to fail. And when you build that type of environment, it's incredible what comes out of it. And that to me is what good leaders will show and will do.
I had a superintendent, a good friend of mine who's since passed away, used to have this saying with all of his stakeholders that anybody is welcome to come into his office and talk about whatever they need to talk about. And he called it a flat level conversation, meaning everybody has equal value, everybody has equal say, and everybody can be part of the solution. I think that's really resonates a lot with me, Jeff, with what you're saying. And again, we go back to these are design thinking in a lot of ways is life lessons too, right? Way to conduct yourself overall. These are really great lessons for anybody to employ in their own life, their own settings, and giving people agency and ownership in part of the process by hearing them and empathizing and understanding them is crucial to any initiative, right?
Well, it's really interesting. Design thinking is also known as human-centered design. It's all focused around the human experience. And like I said, for me, it's about how the right brain really takes over. And what's really fascinating, to your point about the level meeting that you were talking about, we have groups where there's a CEO and a line manager in the same group. We have groups where we've done this before. As a matter of fact, we did one at Stony Brook University where we had a dean and a student in the same group. And you worry, and when they first start, you can see the lower level people are very nervous about what to say. But when the right brain takes over, and that happens through the course of the workshop, and the left brain takes a little bit of a rest, all of that goes away. All of the title goes away. All of the dominance goes away. All of the fear goes away. And by the end of the workshop, they're talking to each other like peers and brothers and sisters, because that's the way ultimately they are starting to think, because their right brain doesn't care about that stuff. The left brain does, because the left brain has to, go up the chain and it has to make sure it hits its mark, but the right brain doesn't care. And one of the great things when I start a workshop, usually they're 2-day sessions, I see people walk in, you watch their body language, their shoulders just slumped over. I got to listen to this guy for 2 day seminar. Oh my God. By the end of the workshop, you have to see the life in these people, because you're freeing them in a sense, that you're unlocking something with them that says, hey, I can fail. I can dream. I can try different things, and I can allow that to succeed. And if I don't, it's okay, because I can do something else. When they realize that their creative selves are awoken again, it's priceless. It's really, I have so much fun doing it just for that. When you see the difference in human beings, so you're spot on. It is a human lesson, not just an academic one. You're on mute.
Just speaking to the workshop piece too, as everybody knows, this is part of a school professional development series, and you have done some work and will continue to do work for school professional development, and specifically for the Center for Corporate Education. I put a link in the chat there, Jeff, for you and for the group. That is your session on September 9th, 2021. You'll be doing a session on design thinking. So anyone who wants to sort of really dig into this and practice, like you said, you're not going to learn everything right here, but it's going to give them a good taste of it, and actually practice and go through some of these activities, group activities that you're talking about, some of these exercises to really learn about this. The School of Professional Development, it really is going to be a go-to place for design thinking, anything corporate education. So you could see that link there. I'll put it in the comments as well to look at if you want more of Jeff moving forward. Jeff, we do have a few Q&A questions if you're okay answering those.
Sure.
So let me just pull those up real quick. I think they're hidden behind my screens here. Let's see, sorry, lost it here. Where are we? Where are we? Here we go. All right. So we have David going back to as far as you mentioned products a little bit and the development of products, ideation around products, design thinking, understanding what the need is, all that stuff. So David actually has a question. Would you say design thinking is a way to ensure companies talk about a product's benefits versus features? Would you say that design thinking is a way to ensure companies focus on one versus the other, or something else?
I wouldn't say it's a way that they talk about that. I would say it's a way they focus on that. So, I love the benefits versus features comment, because features are what companies typically promote. Our product does this, our service does this, our product will do that. And I find that to be incredibly self-serving, because they're figuring they are meeting some need somewhere. Now, I can't say that unequivocally, because maybe they did do their homework, maybe they did do this through design thinking, but by and large, most companies will highlight all of the features. Look at any advertisement that you see for a consumer organization. Look at a college catalog or something that your local government is touting, and it's always coming from their perspective. And a lot of
Mhm.
times people will just not connect with that. That's why a lot of media doesn't get read, a lot of mail gets ripped up, etc., because it's always focused on the features from them to you. But when you talk about the word benefits, and you can use a lot of synonyms with that as well, you're customizing it, the conversation, a little bit to how is this going to be connected to my audience. And so, yeah, I do think it's a way that you focus on that, because the beauty, if you're a marketer, if you are a high level marketer and somebody comes to you and says, we have this idea and here's why it's going to connect, here's the empathy work we did, here's how we tested, here's what they saw, here's how they interacted with us, go ahead and sell it. They'll sell it in a heartbeat. Marketers are great at what they do. And a lot of times I think where marketers struggle is when they're given a task about selling something that they're not sure how it's going to resonate with. But when you use design thinking, because of the process, that's I said process, because of the approach, uh,
Mhm.
see, I'm conditioned to using that word, because of the
We
approach,
all are. We all are. Yeah.
the way you think there, and because you've reached out to get the perspective of your audience, you're focusing more on how am I going to make this something that people will want. It's the term unmet needs. How am I finding those unmet needs for my audience, and how am I delivering on them? Again, regardless of what audience you're catering to. So yeah, I think when you talk about design thinking, you're focused more on that, and that allows you to have that conversation, because otherwise you're just putting widgets out there that your competition is doing too. Look at any brand that's truly successful, and you more than likely are going to see an emotional connection with look at Harley Davidson, look at Tesla, look at Apple. I buy every Apple phone that comes out. I can't tell you why, but I do. I just have this connection with Apple. And that's the thing that you get with design thinking, because Apple, I feel, is catering to me, and that's what a lot of companies do, and that's how a lot of small companies become very large companies.
Great question. Great answer. And I think the benefits piece for me, it goes back to that empathy and understanding, right? If you
Yeah,
you won't understand benefits if you're not understanding the audience that you're serving, right?
yeah.
Essentially. We have a number of questions here. A couple we answered in the broadcast, so I'll get to a few more here. Retha has a great question, which I'd love you to briefly discuss. And it talks about workplace culture. We talked about design thinking as a mindset, as an ideology, but it can, I know from talking to you and from my own experience, culture is a very complex thing. What the culture of a workplace is, very complex. But can you give an example of how design thinking helped with employee engagement and or the workplace culture? And if you can, just maybe explain how it might be possible.
Sure. First off, the person that asked that question is one of my favorite people on the planet. Retha and I work together at Estee Lauder. So hello, Retha. So yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to answer this in two separate ways. The first thing is a client that I have right now that runs design thinking workshops every 2 months or so, and they train 25 people a shot, and they've done this to try and give people an opportunity to learn more, to become more innovative, and to allow them to fail, to let them know that we care about what you think. We want you to innovate. We want you to take chances. We're empowering you with this. And what they've done is by introducing design thinking as a class or course or a seminar, it opened their minds to the fact that they're really cared about. And it changed the way they were thinking, not only about the way management thought about them, but that their thoughts and their ideas count and they can deliver different things. And then they took it a step further. They now run design thinking challenges a couple of times a year. And they run it around things where they give out prizes, and they have like a Shark Tank demonstration for it. And it's just wonderful. So what it's done for the workplace culture is people are energized. The people that have been trained thus far and the people who want to get trained are energized when they come to work, because they're not just doing their job. They know not only that management cares about them, but that they also have the ability to take some chances, because that's what their management believes. And then some of these challenges, by the way, are great. One of them was, I won't name the company or the industry, but they said, if Disney did what we do, what would it look like? And it was just like, it had nothing to do with the processors. It was just how you do it. We did something at Estee Lauder years ago with one of our brands where we said, and this is when he was still alive, of course, if Steve Jobs owned this brand, what would we do different? And it's just this kind of, wow, let's look at this completely different. So it changes workplace culture that way, because people are involved and engaged in coming up with things. And when it's so simple to run design thinking challenges, and the amazing things, Retha is the head of diversity and inclusion for Suffolk County, thinking about what you could do I live in Suffolk County. I see in the paper every day, all of the challenges that we have. And I'm thinking, you can solve this. Stony Brook University has a budget that is constantly getting challenged. Run design thinking. How can we do more with less? How can we make things better? So that's one way about changing workplace culture. And as far as employee engagement goes, it's exactly what I had talked about. But you can also, this is the second way I want to answer this, you can also run design thinking challenges around that. How might we increase employee morale at our company? Mm-hmm. How might we get more people to be engaged and involved in seminars that we can, you can run design thinking challenges around the problem. And it certainly applies to just about every field that you can imagine. So great question. And hopefully that helped.
Yeah, so we have a number of other questions. So I'll try and wrap up into sort of one with some of the things we have here listed. As far as the sustainability of design thinking work, one of the questions is around how does that, is it just a one-shot deal and then you're out of there? I think we talked a little bit about the culture piece, like sustaining that mindset, sustaining that the principles of design thinking. How does that happen in an organization? Beyond, obviously, they could bring you in, they could work and go to some of the things that we offer at School of Professional Development. But then once the door closes and they're done with their engagement with either you or Stony Brook, where does the sustainability happen?
Yeah, first off, by all means, bring me in. I think that's the ultimate. No, so yeah, it is, and that's what I do with organizations. That's something that's a competency we're trying to build at Stony Brook as well. It's a really great question, because if you want to innovate in a company or an organization and say, well, we're going to run a design thinking workshop and check the box, we've innovated, you're fooling yourself. Innovation doesn't happen fast and quickly or by bringing in a consultant. Innovation happens A, over time, and B, by getting management to truly understand and believe that this is something that they want to do. And they've got to be behind it over time. You just don't innovate on a dime. And look at all of the startups in Silicon Valley and Austin, Boston, New York. Look at any new company. Look at Uber and Airbnb. These companies didn't just say, well, let's get an idea. Okay, we're done. This becomes part of their culture. It's woven into the fabric of who they are. So I don't think it's a bad idea to learn design thinking in a one-off workshop, because it is something to learn, but then that's all it becomes. It's just something else to learn. It's something that can really be positive for change going forward. Now, what I tell almost every company there, company that I work with, is I am more than happy to come back every week and do this for you. You never tell a consultant I have too much work for you. However, what's more beneficial for you is if I can train people on how to do this. I mean, you don't just go through a workshop and then can do it. There's an art to it. and let me work with people. Let me build some evangelism in your company. Let me build people who can be brought onto projects. Let me build people who can run those challenges. And some organizations do just that, and they do it really, really well. So, it's not just about design thinking. I would say it's about innovation in general. You've got to really commit to it. Otherwise, you're fooling yourself, and you're not going to get out of it what you want, unless your goal is just, I want people to learn this. I want people to learn design thinking, in which case it will work. So it really, to be sustainable, it's about a desire to be great. It's about a desire to pivot. It's about a desire to grow and be here in 10 years, and not just rely on again, doing what you had always done. It can be a very powerful thing.
Well, I want to be mindful, of course, of everybody's time here, Jeff. I so appreciate this process with you. We've done a lot of work offline, meeting and talking and discussing. We've sort of used that design thinking mindset in the approach to even this webinar, right? And talking about what our audience would love to hear. And I think I was intrigued by what you're saying. I want to thank a few people. We have behind the scenes, we have Kim Jackalone and Karen at School of Professional Development, and our leader, Pat Malone, who's listening in as well. Thank you for that. And I know Leo Giglio has been doing some work behind the scenes with this too. So thank you to all those folks behind the scenes. There's more to come for you, Jeff, with the School of Professional Development. If you need to contact him, Jeff, do you want to put an email in there for folks to be able to contact you as well if they have any follow-up questions? I will forward. We have a slew of Q&A questions here that we don't have time for, but I will forward them to you, Jeff. And if you'd like to get in touch with these folks and answer those questions, that would be great. All right.
My pleasure. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Thank you very much for inviting me, and look forward to working with you more, Al.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. I'm gonna stop our live